Great to see so many of you tuning in today for our latest Innovation at Work webinar series from MIT Sloan Executive Education. This week, we're using our deep dive format. So we're together for a whole hour, and we're really going to get to grips with the topic today. I'm really thrilled to be joined today by my colleague, Otto Scharmer, who's a senior lecturer at the Sloan School of Management and teaches in our executive education programs, as well as in many other programs within the Institute and through MIT X and ULab, these online learning ecosystems. Otto has reached, I think by now, it must be hundreds of thousands of people around the world with his really groundbreaking research and ideas that are all about helping us really change how we think about leadership by being future oriented and really addressing the greatest challenges that we face. Of course, this is a time as 2020 draws to a close that we've all been facing some particular challenges around, for example, the pandemic and the social and the economic consequences of that. But this is not the first kind of huge planetary and human challenge that Otto has turned his attention to and helped us to really approach in a very different way. And so with a whole hour here to really hear from Otto about his work that he's certainly written about in books, he teaches in courses, but there's nothing better than getting to hear from him in person about his ideas and how he brings them to practice in the world. And in today's webinar in particular, we're going to hear about the foundations of this concept of awareness-based system change and looking at whole systems perspectives on major challenges that we face. And I think maybe dive into one particular tool called deep listening that Otto advocates for. As this presentation goes on, we'll keep the Q&A tab open and the chat window open. Feel free to submit questions for Otto that we'll get to later in the webinar through the Q&A at any time. I'll come back on in a little while and help go through those. And also, if you'd like to keep sharing your reactions and thoughts in the chat window while the webinar progresses, we'd really be delighted to engage with you in that way as well. So with that, I would like to once again welcome Otto to this webinar and invite you, Otto, to take it away.
Thank you so much, Peter, for the introduction and for having me in this series. And hello, everyone. It's great to connect, particularly at the tail end of this year. What a year it has been. And, you know, I've been thinking about the year that's almost behind us. And as someone who teaches about systems thinking, I must say the greatest teacher on systems thinking is maybe the year 2020. I mean, so the pandemic really was a real life session globally and for everyone about the importance of systems thinking, about the importance of making us aware of A, how interconnected we are with each other, and B, about everything that we knew was broken before, but now it's right in our face. And when I think about our current moment from the perspective really of 2020, not only as an enemy, as a problem that we need to solve or an enemy that we need to fight, but 2020 as a teacher, then, so the first lesson, I think the pandemic session really was about systems thinking. The second lesson, I would say from 2020, probably has to do with systems thinking on this level, on the level of the heart. I think it's the Black Lives Matter moment that for many of us removed or collapsed a wall that was not only between my perception and reality, that's the systems thinking part, but a wall that is between my experience and the experience of other fellow citizens in this country and on this globe. So I think that was the second lesson. And what's the third lesson, if there is one, like a 2020 lesson? I think the third lesson, maybe we are just in the beginning of now, and it really has to do with how to respond to disruptions, I believe. How to, Peter, you were alluding to that, how to connect. When you live in a moment of disruption, there is a gift because it allows you to connect on a deeper level with what is truly essential for you. And thereby gives you the opportunity, gives us the opportunity to let go of maybe those things that aren't essential. So I want to, in this talk, I want to, I want to share a little bit about this third, maybe emerging lesson from our 2020 experience, and talk about really what it means to live and lead in the face of disruption. So this is an image by my colleague Kelvy Bird. And it depicts what everyone is talking about, disruption, right? So if we picture ourselves in current reality here on the left-hand side, and we know a lot about that, right? Then the second component is over here. That's kind of the emerging future. We know less about the future, but some, we have perspectives, but slightly less agreement on, probably. But the one thing that we know least about is how to move from here to there. How to connect and operate from the emerging future, not just kind of looking onto it from a distance. And that's really the question that has been organizing my own research over the past 15 plus years. And I'm going to share with you a few of the lessons. And that basically, if I would summarize it with a word, what does it take to respond to a situation like that, which we face, not only as individuals, as organizations, we also face this as a society, as a global community, right? So we know that the future is going to be different from the past. That's the definition of disruption. But what we don't know is how to move from here to there. And what I'm going to argue is that what it takes is a journey that's both an outer journey and an inner journey. So I am the background I'm speaking from, and Peter was alluding to that, is systems thinking. That's why I came here to MIT. And as you know, probably, and you have seen this such an iceberg model many times in your life, all systems thinking really starts with a very simple distinction, which is the distinction between symptoms at the top and root issues below the waterline, okay? And these three words, structures, thought, paradigms of thought, or mental models, right, as Peter Senge likes to say, and source, they're in a nutshell, they point at the evolution of systems thinking over the past 50 plus years. And so that's what I'm going to talk about that. And what I'm basically saying is, in order to respond to the profound challenges of our time, we need to operate as a leader. So what does a leader do? A leader does more than just reacting against the symptoms. A leader understands and is addressing these root issues here as needed. And what I'm basically saying is leadership today really involves all four of these levels of responses. And I want to, and that's what I call awareness-based systems change. And I want to summarize that with four simple sentences and principles. The first one comes from Kurt Lewin, who famously kind of the founder of action research, and a lot of really the father of what today is known as action learning, and is so influential at Sloan and at MIT. You cannot understand a system unless you change it. And to that, I would add, right, summing up I'm an action researcher myself. So here's the sentence that sums up my past 20 years of learning by doing, being involved in a variety of change projects across industries, across sectors. You cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. So basically, what does that mean? It means, okay, if you want to change a system, you need to address all 4 of these levels. If you just tinker around with the first 2, then what's going to happen? Some structural change, yes, and then the same people will create the same problems again. So the real essence of profound systems change, or of deep systems change, really deals with changing and evolving the way we think, our paradigms of thought, and the deeper sources we are operating from. Okay, so if we assume, if you don't like consciousness, just replace that with the word mindsets, so maybe that's in some contexts a more usable word. You cannot change the system unless you transform the mindsets of the people operating in these systems. So if that's true, then of course the real question is how. You can't transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. Now, of course, we know that from, let's say, our coaching experience, from our personal experiences, when we as leaders, as human beings, as change makers, go through a period of profound change, as citizens maybe, right? So what does it take? If I go through a period of profound change where I need to let go something and something else is beginning to happen, I need somebody who's listening to me, right? That's called a friend, it's called a coach, it's called many things, but that's basically what it is. Somebody who is mirroring back to me, who is listening to me and mirroring back what I'm sharing. So making a system see and sense itself, the problem is on a systems level, on an organizational level. So here's, to sum that up, no person can go through a period of profound change alone, okay? We know that from our personal relationships. But what I would claim is no organization can go through a period of profound change alone. And that's kind of what this third thing is talking about. Unless you make a system see and sense itself, we need new places, new tools, new methods of having this reflective space of seeing ourselves through the eyes of others, also on an organizational, also on a whole systems level. And then lastly, you cannot transform a system unless you sense and actualize the future as it emerges. So if you double click on the English word leadership, at the root of that, it's the derivative of an Indo-European word root, life, and it literally means stepping forth. So the essence of leadership is really stepping forth from one territory to the next one, right? From the current system into the emerging future. And that's, of course, also at the heart of all true entrepreneurship, as we all know. So that's a little bit, but how to actually do that, how to, when we learn, not only learn from the past and learn from, what has happened in the past, but connect with emerging future possibilities and then actualize them. That's going to be what I will be investigating. And to summarize that, or much of that, not all of that, but summarize the essence of this method, or what the method does when you work with it, it's actually a shift in perspective. So that's probably the single most important thing, that the way people look at the system, right? And that can be an organization you're part of, it can be a community, it can be something else, that there's a profound shift from how you see the system, from how you see reality, from this, where you have the observer here and the observed out here, okay? The telescope view, to this. Seeing the system in a way that includes your own contribution towards creating the system, right? The shift from this to this is really 50% of what all change management is about, right? Because as long as I say, well, as long as I say, okay, the real problem that we are facing here is all the idiots around me, right? We are not having a very useful conversation. So 50% of change management is helping people in a situation to see their own part, how I am contributing to the problem that we face together. And only then we begin to have a practical conversation. So on the level of the individual, if I shift from this mindset to this mindset, we call that reflection, or also we call that mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is the capacity of paying attention to your attention. And when we live in an attention economy, right, paying attention to your attention is really the foundation of all leadership activities. Now, when you look at communication, let's say team communication, people move from talking this way to talking this way. It is the shift from discussion or debate to dialogue. Dialogue is not just people talking with each other. Dialogue is making a system see itself. So it's a conversation that we have that helps us to reflect on our own assumptions. All strategy processes rely on that, obviously, right? Because we need to reflect on our assumptions that we have about the future. All scenario thinking relies on that. Okay, so you know this, right? So the 17, I'm sure, the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, adopted by the UN, the United Nations General Assembly 2015. 5 years are gone. That's a 2030 agenda, right, to realize these goals. And we are far from realizing it. But more and more, more lately, we see more and more traction, including in how companies, particularly global companies, communicate their contributions to society, right, in their own reporting, in their own framing, their own narrative. What contribution do we, what is it we contribute as an enterprise kind of to any of those 17 sustainable development goals? So I want to, but the bottom line is to really realize these objectives here that we don't have time to dissect more in detail now. We need to apply a systems thinking approach that, as I said before, operates on all these levels, all 4 levels. So how do we do that? And in researching that, I actually listened to a whole number of innovators, of practitioners, kind of innovators in business, in society, in research and science. And there are like 2 main learnings that came from that research, and also from later other applied experiences that I had. And the first one is captured in this quote by the late CEO of Hanover Insurance, Bill O'Brien. He summarized his many episodes of successful and also less successful episodes of leading transformational change with the following sentence: the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So what he basically says is the success of what I do as a CEO, what I do as a change maker, depends on the inner place from that I operate. So when I heard that, it really opened up a whole other dimension of awareness and research, because I was quite aware of, in leadership and in innovation, we know all about what successful pioneers and leaders do. We know all about how, the process, but what do we know about the source, the inner place? From that I operate, from that you operate, from that they operate. So that really opened up a whole other dimension of inquiry for me, frankly, because I realized that's more or less a blind spot. It's a blind spot. If you put a camera on somebody, that's what you don't see. You need to investigate that in a different way. And today I would summarize this inner place that Bill O'Brien said is what matters most with these three terms. Or, I mean, with a very simple condition, let me put it that way, which is you need to get beyond downloading. And what I mean with beyond downloading is you need to get out of your own bubble, right? Of habitual routines. You need to, if you face a moment of disruption, you need to remove yourself from inside your own bubble towards the edges. You need to let go of some of the habitual patterns of action and thought in order to open up to new possibilities. So that's kind of the general condition here, right? But the three terms that today, really that I would use to map the territory of this inner place, of this, what he called interior condition, okay, is open mind, open heart, open will. By which I mean curiosity, compassion, and courage. So that's, and I will talk more about that, but that's basically kind of the first thing that I learned. It's about this inner place, that it's not the innovator's journey when you deal with disruption. It's not just about an outer journey. It's also about an inner journey. That inner journey essentially is about opening up these deeper instruments of knowing. Now, the second thing that I learned is you need a process, right? To bring that into reality, to bring that into organizational and institutional reality, you of course need a process. And kind of the simplest way of describing that process is by these three stages: observe, 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 reflect and retreat, allow the inner knowing to emerge. That's kind of the moment of stillness, if you want, the moment of letting go and letting come. And number three, act in an instant. So explore the future by doing, right? The prototyping that we all are so familiar with. So in a somewhat more granular version, kind of, so you can describe this process, this deep learning process, right, with these terms, kind of seeing, sensing, right? That's kind of the observe, observe, observe. And then, presencing, that's kind of what I mean by sensing and actualizing, kind of emerging future possibilities. And then the crystallizing, prototyping, and creation part, that's just kind of bringing the new into reality. So in a way, you can say this deep learning process, how can you really summarize that? It's really seeing it, sensing it, which really means feeling it. Presencing really means being it, right? Seeing it, feeling it, being it. And then this whole right-hand side is about co-creating it. So to some degree, what I'm presenting to you is a perspective that basically says, hey, what's the problem we have today? We are disconnected with reality. That's the problem. So what we really need is to connect with what's going on around us and between us in a much more systematic and profound way. So hence, kind of this deep learning process, seeing it, feeling it, or sensing it, being it, and then co-creating it. So, okay, that's basically, right? Open mind is seeing with fresh eyes. Open heart is empathizing, right? Seeing a situation through the eyes of your stakeholders, not from your own perspective, not from inside your own silo, right? And this Open will really is letting go and letting come, letting go of the old, letting come of the new. All right, we know that when we are lucky, right? So when you show this thing to people and say, yeah, I know people that work that way, kind of profound innovators. I even had moments like that in my own life, right? So I can track that process. Many people can track that process. It's kind of the, when we move into the space of deep co-creativity, into the space of flow, we know that. But let's not be kidding ourselves. What is really going on, right? When we look around us, the precise opposite of everything I just said. That's what has been amplified so much, particularly over the past few years, right? It's not opening the mind, heart, will, it's closing the mind, heart, will, AKA amplifying doubt, hate, and fear. It's not like seeing and sensing, but it leads to these behaviors: denial, which is not seeing, and desensing, which is not feeling the other, right? Being stuck in our echo chambers. It's not about letting go and presencing, connecting with our highest future possibility, but it's holding on, and absencing really is disconnecting with our highest future possibility. And instead of co-creating the new, we end up in patterns of collective behavior, of blaming, destruction, and eventually self-destruction. And I don't need to explain to you that, particularly over the past few years, I mean, this is, right? So we live in an age where we have seen a massive amplification, in politics, but also in business, right? Business models that are based on maximizing user engagement by activating hate, ignorance, and fear. So that's a big driver today, right? It's not kind of, okay, this is not happening. So a big challenge we face today is these things: doubt, hate, and fear. How do we deal with that? And what I mean with that, doubt really is the condition of post-truth, post-democracy. And you could say the third one maybe has to do with post-humanity, where our humanity is at risk. By which I mean disinformation and doubt, obviously, kind of, we just, that doesn't need any explanation, I guess. Architectures of separation, right? Post-democracy is really, and we can see it here in the United States more clearly than, but it's a global phenomenon, right? We are stuck inside our own echo chambers, our own bubbles, and lose the possibility to connect and communicate with each other in more diverse communities. And then, post-humanity is really the fueling of fear, anxiety, and in some cases also fanaticism. So dealing with that, if you, I think being a leader today requires you to really understand these dynamics, understand these drivers, and come up with robust strategies that are able to transform these patterns, because these are part of the patterns. It's not the only pattern, but that's part of what's shaping reality. So what are these deeper leadership capacities? I think that could transform these three conditions, which are the conditions of our current moment, right? Post-truth, post-democracy, post-humanity. And I would say the first one, right, relating to the post-truth and being able to transform it, is all about science. What is the essence of science? Let the data talk to you. Can you listen with humility? So Ed Schein's notion of the humble leader, right? I think that really kind of, can we relate to reality that it's our teacher and we are not just projecting stuff out there? This architectures of separations really call for architectures of connection. And where we can feel the resonance, right? So the question here is not only can you listen with humility, but can you sense your ecosystem, right? That you have as an entrepreneur, as a leader, from the edges. That means from the viewpoint of all your stakeholders, particularly the ones that are most marginalized. Because if you cannot, then you're just flying or managing a system without navigation devices. And the last one really is about, I think, the deeper essence of entrepreneurship, which is about activating action confidence. And what I mean with action confidence is not doing things well. What I mean with action confidence is stepping into profoundly new territories, which is exactly what the current moment is calling for. So let me, at the end of this, just show you a few examples, right? So basically, what I'm saying here is something very simple, right? Can you listen with humility, right? Can you relate to stuff you don't like to see, right? In a way that it's teaching you. Can you sense the system from the edges? Can you feel what the other stakeholders in your system feel? And particularly the one that are most marginalized. And who is that, by the way? And then can you not only sense, but then also actualize the future opportunity that emerge from that process? So those are basically the three questions I'm asking. And I will give you a few examples. And financial, kind of the biggest fintech in the world. This is the top 30 people of that company. And the issue was globalization, how to evolve their strategy in Southeast Asia in this case. And what we did is, and so the way the CEO framed the question was, look, so we have the smartest people in the world for each of their job, but our collective IQ is not really at the level. So that it should be. So how can we better operate as a team at the top 30 people? And so we took one specific strategic issue, which in this case was their globalization strategy in Southeast Asia, and then made them going for half a week on a listening journey. They mapped the entire ecosystem all the way from the regulators to the unbanked people, the underserved communities in the country. And then they just went out in groups of 2 or 3 to listen to all these stakeholders. No judgment, no, just kind of put yourself into the shoes of all that. Half a week. So 15 people country A, 15 people country B. And then, they met, and that's where this picture is taken from, in Singapore, and for sense making, right? And to identifying these deeper patterns. And really beginning to have, as a team at the top, a much more useful conversation, because as you all know, or anyone who ever took any, let's say, empathic design or process, you know that the problem is not that people don't have good ideas. The problem is you don't have a shared sense of reality. That's the key for collective creativity. And that's kind of what this process does. It was a week spent on basically listening and sense making, right? Listening with humility. Don't tell people, just listen. And then make sense together, right? From the edges, bringing in all these different perspectives. This is Brazil, addressing some of the food deserts in Sao Paulo. 30 different organizations, kind of from government to local businesses, global businesses, and NGOs. So it's very diverse, very full of conflict and stuff. But in this tool here, 3D mapping, is helping people to bring in to give a voice and have all these different experiences and shared, very different ones, heard together, and thereby building a space of resonance, building a container to operate as a whole. That's another tool here, something we call 4D mapping. It's a blend between mindfulness, social science, theater, kind of, or stakeholder mapping, you could say, and constellation work for those of you familiar with that. So it's basically leaning not only into the current system and embodying the current system, but also emerging future possibilities, and thereby giving a language to that system to address some of the deeper issues at hand. Can you bring that to scale? So through ULab, kind of this is basically a class I teach at Sloan that we brought through edX online. We have had 190,000 registered participants and many communities in many places. So yes, I think there are ways where you can, for deep leadership learning, radically decentralize the classroom to really locally held and cultivated communities, which you then through technology connect and enable to learn from and with each other. And this is a current process or project going on in the with the UN system. So in 10 different countries, kind of helping the UN teams to organize on a country level with their stakeholders in a way that it better serves the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. So let me move over this last one here, which is maybe a little bit too much. I want to have enough time for the discussion. So basically, I started with asking the question, what does it take to respond to a situation like that, to a situation where we face profound disruption, where we are facing a situation where we need to let go and don't know how to move from here to there. And what I basically said is it takes a journey, an outer journey to the edges of the system, but also an inner journey in terms of open mind, open heart, open will. And to do that well on the level of the system or on the level of an organization, we need a support infrastructure. So if you want, kind of, if that's what we try to do as a global community, right, which is in our innovation efforts, which is civilizational renewal and planetary healing, then, which is a shorthand for the SDGs, okay, then the only way of doing that, really, I know, and I have experienced in the past 2 decades, is by bringing multi-stakeholder groups together, very diverse groups, and helping them to access their own co-creativity, right? Move them from antagonistic and toxic relationships to co-creative relationships, which is what I mean with this activating generative social fields, right? That's co-creativity. And to do that at scale, I believe, requires a support infrastructure, right? A learning infrastructure, something I call school for transformation. Because we live in the beginning of a decade that I believe will see and requires us to deliver profound transformation across all societal sectors. Basically, that's what the SDGs amount to. But what's not there, so the requirement and the need for transformation is there, but what's not there, the transformation literacy, the capacity to actually lead transformations. And that's kind of the school for transformation. So something I try to prototype in my work as of late, which is really focusing on something very simple, which is this: democratize access to transformation literacy. So the methods and tools, like some of which I illustrated, really democratize the access to that it's available to all the people, all the organizations, all the communities that are dealing with these challenges now. So that's pretty much what I have to share and what I wanted to share. And with that, I turn it back over to you, Peter, for the conversational part of this session.
Thank you very much, Otto. We've had a lot of interesting questions coming in through the Q&A and discussion in observations in the chat as well. But while those are still coming, maybe I can start with one sort of big picture question just before we dive deeper. And that is in looking at that wonderful drawing by Kelvy Bird that illustrates trying to sort of take this step across a chasm that maybe feels like a single dimensional challenge. And one of the things that we're all grappling with at the moment, of course, is that we have to do that, but in multiple directions and multiple dimensions, if you like. It's not just a single challenge that we're facing so many challenges. And it's a scenario where we're moving to a phase of continuous change. So it's not that we've got this one big change we have to make and then we're set. We have to probably do this over and over and over again to continue to thrive in this world that is where the pace of change driven by technology and other factors is continuously accelerating. So if you think about the most recent times and the work that you've been doing most recently, are you seeing the effects of those kinds of those two things? The fact that people are being faced with so many different challenges at the same time that they need to address, and that there's no such thing as a static challenge in many ways either these days also. And if so, how are you helping people cope with really the overwhelmingness of that?
Well, that's a great question. I think what we all probably see is probably there's no organization around that hasn't seen the following two things. One is that the pandemic actually was operated as an accelerator in many things. So because so we made changes happen. I mean, MIT is an example for that, but many other organizations are. So people are basically amazed how much you can get done, how fast, and processes and changes that seemed impossible before or only possible over a longer period of time actually did happen in days and weeks in many occasions. So there is this, I mean, everyone knows this, never let a crisis go to waste, right? So where there is the crisis and the danger, that's where the possibility is, right? And that's why leadership matters. I remember actually working with an organization in the 2008 financial crisis, and that organization was badly hit, right? The markets broke down from 110 to almost zero, right? In many of their global markets. So it was really exposed. And then what I noticed in that organization is in some teams, so I was working with the director level there, which is 2 levels below the board of management. And some of them reported about, through the crisis, it sparked a lot of co-creativity in their teams and extended teams, and how they were able to respond across teams to that situation. While others reported about the exact opposite, right? Everyone was, so a loss of energy and people frustrated and pulling out. And so, and then I wondered, so how is it possible that the same situation in the same organization, right, in some places has that result, and in other places has another result? And so what I found is that what makes the difference is leadership, is your capacity to lean into the unknown. So whether even in particular in a situation where you don't know what the solution is going to be, do you show up? Are you available for your people? Are you creating holding and sense-making spaces? Are you listening to them? Are you engaging, even though you don't have the solution yourself? Or are you pulling out and disappearing and trying to maybe analytically figure out what the next steps is, and thereby not providing the deeper sense-making spaces for your teams, kind of for your ecosystems of stakeholders? So that's where I learned kind of how this, when disruption hits, these deeper support spaces of sense making and of leaning into the unknown are absolutely critical. And I would say, yes, it is true, it's multidimensional. And we all know that in 2020, we are at the beginning of a decade that will be defined by disruption. It's not the end of it. But I would also say that we can say that we can take some confidence out of, because I think from a leadership perspective, it's true, like all the applications are different, but the leadership perspective is not all that different each time, right? And what I'm noticing there is, and that's what I try to capture with these key terms I shared with you, is really one of the biggest challenges that everyone faces there, and your teams are also facing, is the challenge of doubt and ignorance, the challenge of anger and cynicism, like and hate, which is like an emotional disengagement or separation from the other, and then the issue of fear, right? So those are the inner challenges that we face that, if we don't have a language for them, are very likely to deviate our attention into and make us more reactive, or not, taking the right kind of bold moves that in some situations are being called for. So yes, it is multidimensional and it is just beginning. But I also would say that the mapping that I shared with you, that's actually not changing that much. I mean, that's basically the stuff that will be relevant throughout this decade, I would say.
So the tools can cope with and help with the complexity as well. On the last point that you're making, we've been getting a lot of questions, if I could try to summarize them, that have to do with, one thing you identified, maybe a mechanism that perhaps is contributing to and driving what we often call polarization these days. And people are interested in your observations on that. And also, I think from a very practical sense, clearly you're advocating that ideally we'd like to operate in the process of the you, and we're often challenged by interacting with people who are very much operating in the process of the inverted you, and maybe in reality many of us are there ourselves, even though we don't recognize it always. But what strategies have you found work to be able to sense and engage productively with people who are very locked into that inverted you, whatever we do ourselves or whatever we believe ourselves, how do we cross that gap?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a critical question, particularly here for us in the United States. But we are also, I mean, look around. I mean, we are just a microcosm of what also happens elsewhere. So I think the first part of the question was, did I hear that right? Kind of why is that so amplified? So why?
Yes.
I think kind of there's two main drivers really that, I mean, there are many more obviously, but I think two important ones is the use of dark money in politics, which is very significant amount, and which has been significantly increasing over the past decade, which wasn't even legal to that degree before. And it's basically filter bubbles, right? So it's business models that that are based on maximizing user engagement, which in turn are based on activating anger, hate, and fear. And I think that's why we talk about Facebook, right? So that's why we talk, but it's not just Facebook. I think it's a business model that works for a few companies. Look at who are the trillion-dollar companies, and what is the relationship to data there. And the problem there is, as Shoshana Zuboff has pointed out, is epistemological inequality. So that the way kind of the data ownership is structured today, it's like a one-way mirror, right? So one side can see everything about us and thereby manipulate our behavior. And that's, basically what you sell as a business proposition, while the other side sees almost nothing, right? And I think the pandemic is a great example where we have starting to have this discussion, right? How can we use the power of big data to the benefit of not just, 2 or 3 people, but to the benefit really of the community, of the whole system? I think that's an important conversation. And so the later, so remind me, what was the second question?
I think it was how do we cross the chasm or engage people who are
Yeah.
locked in the top part of the U?
So we know what's not working, right? Which is arguing with data, right? I mean, so we just spent 4 years, right? So if you try, and I think that trying to have the better winning argument is not working there. What's working is first building relationship. And that's what we do, let's say, down your own street, right? So when you talk to your neighbors, well, kind of, so then in a much more natural way, you put yourself into the shoes of people who may think very, very different from where you are coming from. And I think that's the why I am talking about architectures of connection, right? Because if you try to the polarization, address the polarization and the big drivers that fuel polarization, just by getting out more data, why we just had 4 years of that, right? It's not working, and I think the issue is relationship, and that means it starts small, and that means we need both in the digital realm. I mean, that's kind of the big tech discussion we are having, but also on a local realm, we need to just create a new civic infrastructure where we are not organized around people who think alike, but we are organized around the problems that we face together. So the problem today is not kind of how to organize action around people who have the same ideology. I mean, that's pretty much useless. I think the problem we have in countries today is how we can organize collective action around people, in constellations of people that think very differently, that have very different, let's say, ideologies or mindsets, but that are connected through the challenges that they face in their own communities. I think that's where the resource is. The challenge that we face together is our friend, because particularly on a local level, even though kind of maybe our politics may be very different, but we live in the same community, we face the same issues, and therefore we are much more likely to align ourselves around how we better respond to that. And in fact, I think that's already happening to a much larger degree than what's being given credit for in the public conversation, because the public conversation is mostly amplified and shaped by the toxic part, right, of the equation that I also shared. Yet it does not reflect many of the good things that often happen on a local level, but we haven't found out how to aggregate that more to the higher systems levels that we need to.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think one conclusion, maybe we all believe, to some extent, we're operating sort of, or would like to think we're operating in that lower U, even though many times ourselves we might in fact be in that condition of the upper.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And so when you look at the bigger systems today, when you look at our environmental issues, I mean, just look at the bigger system outcomes that we create. The following sentence is true for many big systems today, which is, we collectively create results that nobody wants. No one is standing up in the morning and saying, okay, today I'm going to destroy more of the last remaining ecosystems that we have on Earth. I'm kind of making other people unhappy, and I'm making myself also unhappy, right? No one is doing that yet. On a collective level, that's exactly what we currently enact. So we enact systems collectively that in order to be transformed, need to be paid attention to. And we need to, so it's like when you learn mindfulness practices or meditation practices. So what is it that's happening? So you try to focus your attention on an object, right? And then be that you're breathing, be that something else, the feeling of your body. And then the next thing you notice is your attention is wandering off. Okay. So that's a little bit. And what do you do then? You don't beat down on yourself. You just notice that and you put yourself back on track, right? Realign attention and intention. At the end of the day, I think the essence of awareness-based leadership is something very simple. It's realigning attention and intention. We live in an attention economy. Attention matters because wherever your attention goes as a leader, that's where the energy goes. Your own energy and the energy of the people around you, your sister, your teams, your organization. Energy follows attention. And that's why attention matters. And what we need to learn is to realign attention and intention. Too often, we place our attention on stuff that we want to prevent or fight against, right? What do? We are strengthening these phenomena that we want to get rid of, right? So realigning attention and intention is really that as leaders, we begin to see, we cultivate the capacity to see the seeds of the future and the now. And then by paying attention to them, we are strengthening them and amplifying them and bringing them into reality more fully. All the solutions of the future that we need are already here, right? The future is here, as it has been said many times. It's just unevenly distributed.
Thank you. That helps. One final question, perhaps from the Q&A that really cuts to the core for many of us. You know, if you're not the CEO, you're not in a position of hierarchical leadership in your organization, and you really would like to help your organization embrace this way of being, this way of thinking, and this way of being, creating a future. What have you found that works for people in that situation? How can they help drive their organization in the ways that you're describing?
So, I mean, basically what I say, to summarize what I said, I mean, some of you may be familiar with that French philosopher Descartes, right? I think, therefore I am. That's not what I'm saying, right? What I say is, I pay attention this way, therefore it emerges that way. So basically, the way we pay attention to a situation is shaping that situation and how it unfolds. And we know that from listening, right? So when you somebody is sharing with me something of significance, and whether I deeply pay attention to that or whether I'm thinking about something else makes a profound difference right away, because we feel these things. So what matters as a leader is how you show up, your presence, how you bring, it's the inner place from that you operate, your quality of attention, your quality of listening, your quality of presence. And that is true regardless of where you are in the system. Here at MIT, of course, we have a systems-based concept of leadership, which is leadership is distributed, right? It's not one person at the top or some other place. It's how we connect and interact with each other. Leadership is distributed. It's the capacity. Leadership is the capacity of a system to sense and actualize the future. And it takes all of us. So wherever you are, you can start with that, both in your professional life and in your personal life. And in terms of getting the top leadership attention, I think I have one, maybe a suggestion, which is pay attention to the crack. What I mean with crack is where the old system is cracking because it's creating results that are no longer acceptable, right? We live in a moment of disruption. That means a lot of the old business and ways of operating need to be challenged, need to be rethought, and that's where the crack is. So apply the listening to your environment and find out where the crack is in your system, and then focus on that, and that will also get the attention of the decision makers in the organization.
Great, thank you, Otto. And that very practical way of thinking about and being and acting, I think we all took away the importance of action from your thoughts today and your examples. So unfortunately, we're out of time. We could go on for a lot longer, but it remains for me to thank you so much for this tremendous discussion that we've been having. We had many questions we were unable to get to, and Otto, you very kindly agreed to work with the team to address some of those questions in a follow-up message that we will share with everyone that's been participating in the webinar today as well. Thank you very much, Otto. Thank you all for joining us from all around the world, for your questions and engagement and discussion with each other in the chat. We look forward to seeing many of you, we hope, in the new year in our next webinar, which will be with Aurélie Jean, and I believe will help us understand how to think about the world from the perspective of algorithms, which I'm fascinated to learn more about. Thank you again, Otto. Thank you all. Everyone, please enjoy safely this holiday season, wherever you are in the world, however you may be celebrating it, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone in the new year.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks to everyone.